Hello and welcome back to Movie Husbands. Today we'll be reviewing John Wick Chapter 4. With the price on his head ever increasing, legendary hitman John Wick takes his fight against the high table global as he seeks out the most powerful players in the underworld, from New York to Paris to Japan to Berlin. John Wick 4 is directed by Chad Stahelski. So Matt, what did you think of John Wick Chapter 4?
This movie was a blast. I had so much fun seeing this film. Why do you seem so taken back by that? You enjoyed yourself in the theater too. But before we get into all of that, I think this film is just another great example of what you can do with a modest budget.
Modest.
Modest. Yeah, I'm going to say modest because
Half of a Marvel movie.
yes, half of a Marvel movie because it was a $100 million budget. So yes, it is more than Everything Everywhere at Once, but it is less than a Marvel movie. It just shows in its ingenuity, in its practicality. This film has such an intense focus on stunt work. When I was doing my research on this movie, because I have seen the other John Wick movies, except 3, I haven't seen the whole thing, but I never knew who the director was. So you mentioned it was Chad Stahelski. What I didn't know was that he was Keanu Reeves' stunt coordinator in the original Matrix movie. So I wonder if that's maybe how they met. I'm not entirely sure. He is a stunt coordinator and a stunt director. So that just shows itself throughout this entire movie. And the stunt work was absolutely brilliant. But I had such a blast watching this movie because of the ingenuity, the creativity. It just came through in all these beautiful action sequences. And that is basically what these movies are. They're all about the action sequences. And this movie, I think, more so than the other ones that I had seen, had pulled it off in a greater extent than those films.
It definitely has much more ornate and complex action sequences. What's interesting is the first movie had a really modest budget. I'm not sure what it was, but it was not much. And that movie stretched that budget to make it look like far more than it was. And each film has gotten progressively a little bit more money and a little bit more complex with its action sequences, leading up to this film, which is just an all-out, blowout insanity of you're just like, how did they do this kind of thing. And you know how they did it, but it takes such precise orchestration. It's almost like you're watching a choreographed dance number or like a ballet of carnage on screen. There's an amazing scene that we won't spoil too much, but we'll just say it takes place with an overhead shot. The amount of ingenuity and orchestration and choreography that went into that scene was absolutely remarkable. And it takes such a high wire act and so much vision to pull those scenes off.
Touching on a little bit of what you just said there in terms of that overhead shot, because it was one of the things I was going to mention in particular. And there's a lot of sequences that are like this. There's one in France around one of those famous rotaries that takes place. Yeah. But the way it's shot and the way it's edited is more of a compliment and appreciation of the stunt work than it is a hindrance to it. Yeah. Because there's a lot of these action movies that rely so much on the editing that you almost lose a little bit of what makes it seem realistic. And the great thing about this movie is, particularly in that overhead shot, it's not just that it's overhead, but it lasts for minutes on end, and it traces the way through multiple rooms, which is so cool. And the great thing about that is that same methodology plays its way through all the action sequences in this movie. The stunt coordination on these sequences is absolutely insane, which was funny as I was going to talk about in this review, how I was like, why isn't stunts in the Oscars? Like, why don't we honor all the work that goes into making these certain scenes happen? Because it's not just the stunt work, it's coordinating, it's blocking. All these things require so much effort and so many people. And then I was researching Chad a little bit, and then I just saw an interview with Deadline where they literally talked about that. Yeah. Chad had mentioned that the conversation just needs to happen. It's not like anybody doesn't appreciate these things, but the conversation needs to be more to get it to happen, I guess. I do think this is a great example of why stunt work should be honored at the Oscars, because there is so much detail and it just bleeds out of the screen. And that's funny because the body count in this movie is absolutely insane compared to the other ones. But I think that's just my main point, is that, you know, I think it should be honored in the Oscars in some way.
Yeah, I had a brief conversation at work on Friday with somebody else who had seen the movie on Thursday night. And this is a person that doesn't seem to be like into film that much or think they love the technical aspects of film very much. And he was like, that overhead shot, how did they do that? So like, in a sense, it's starting to get people to think about the mechanics of filmmaking in a much more interesting way than I think a lot of action scenes would. What's really cool is let's break down that overhead shot for a second. Again, without totally spoiling what happens, and I couldn't even recount all the things that happen in that scene anyway, you have a shootout, which in films of a lot less craft are people, you know, hiding for cover and being like, pew, pew, and then that kind of thing. So you have a shootout with people constantly moving, so you have to correlate the gun's fire to the exploding walls to mimic the bullets. Then you have people approaching one another to do kung fu and fight hand to hand. Then there's another gun that's thrown in the mix that sets people on fire. So there's all of these things, pyrotechnics and mimicking the like real gunfire and kung fu choreography all going on at once without a break. It's crazy. It really is crazy because most films have one of those types of action and they really only need to master that part of it. This film needs to master all of these things at the same time and do it without cutting the camera.
It really is amazing. And on top of that, you mentioned quite briefly, but the practical effects in this film are absolutely insane. Having to make all these explosions go off in relation to all the action that's happening in a sequence is very well done here. I think Marvel needs to take a little bit of note here when they're seeing the success of these movies, and also just I think what people are interested in. There's a sense of movie magic that you really get from seeing all these practical effects. It's something that Hollywood has been losing sight of a little bit. Of course, there's movies that have done it very well. We could look at Everything Everywhere All at Once this past year, and now this movie. We could look at Top Gun. We could look at the Mission Impossible movies. I think those do a great job of adding practical effects and stunt work. You see less of that, and you lose that heart a little bit when you just see all this work done on a blue screen. I think bringing that back, or just having to focus on that a little bit more in terms of industry-wide, that would be a great thing to see. I do want to move to Keanu Reeves in this movie because he is so good. One of my favorite things about him in terms of his character in this film is the way he moves. Because he moves around with his gun shooting people so haphazardly, almost like he looks confused, like, why am I here?
My favorite is when his gun runs out and he just throws it. And which he does in all the movies at various points. It so perfectly hits the guy, but looks so like tired too. He's like, ugh.
He's almost stumbling around through all these action sequences with his legs. He has like this wide like leg movement.
Yeah, and he starts to get slower as the sequences go on, which I like too.
Which adds a little bit of a comedic element because you just see how tired he is. And we're kind of tired for him because we just spent 10 minutes watching a full action sequence where people just keep coming at him. And you're like, where are all these bad guys coming from? You know, people grow older, obviously our physical abilities decline, and he is 56 years old and he is just doing it better than so many other people his age. I give him so many props.
This is a quote from The Big Picture, but he was talking about how he's like, I can barely get out of bed and I'm like 32. Look what Keanu Reeves is doing. I want to talk about Donnie Yen, who plays Kane, who is probably my favorite character in the movie. Kane is a blind man who is an expert assassin. He uses his heightened senses of other senses that he has to execute these action sequences. Absolutely amazing. There's a scene where he uses these motion sensors that have a doorbell sound that's absolutely terrific. Donnie Yen is a Hong Kong legend, so it was amazing to see him in this film and to be able to show off what he does so expertly in so many Hong Kong films in the 90s and early 2000s. But he absolutely stole this movie for me. I loved his character. I love the sense that there's multiple assassins going after John Wick at the same time, and they all want the money to, having been the one that killed him. So in a sense, you see these assassins team up with him sometimes because they want to increase the bounty on his head. They don't want other people to kill John Wick. They want the honor of doing it and the money to do it. So these guys are both friends and foes at different parts of the movie. I really like that dynamic.
I agree. He was absolutely amazing. And jumping back a little bit to what I said earlier, the way this movie is shot and edited complements the craft that these actors have and their martial arts abilities and their stunt work to such a great degree. I think it's one of the greatest aspects of this being directed by a stunt director. He knows how to put a spotlight on the craft that these people have worked their lives mastering. It's really great to see that shown in a way that really shows them off rather than hinders their performances because they put so much work and effort to it. I do want to mention Rina Sawayama. She plays Akita in this film. She is the daughter of the head of the Continental Hotel, Hiroyuki Sanada. He is also a very popular person in the martial arts
world,
movie world. I've seen him many times. These people were also fantastic in the movie, and their own stunt work was very well done and fascinating to me. I love the sequence where they have the sword duel.
Yeah.
It's like the sword duel to the death that takes place at the hotel. The production design and the set design in that scene was absolutely amazing.
The whole movie.
Hotel. The whole movie, yeah.
Yeah, actually, a random user on Letterboxd pointed this out to me when I was reading reviews, that these films are so well lit. Not only are they interestingly lit because you have people fighting in these locales that are just gorgeously decorated with all these neon lights and lights turning on and off, but the films are so well lit that you can see everything going on all the time, which again is a tribute to stunt work and us wanting to see every bit of stunt work that these people do. So I thought that was really cool as well. These films owe a lot to John Woo. I just want to put that out there. Amazing director. I think he still is directing, actually. He's mostly directing in Hong Kong.
And then last but not least, I do want to talk quickly about Bill Skarsgård because he plays one of the other major characters in this film. He is almost like the petulant child of the table right now.
Such a brat.
He's such a brat, such a know-it-all, and also such a weakling.
Yeah.
The way he puts people in front of him to take out Keanu Reeves' character is really just sad. The great thing about his character is that he plays it so well, you see him for the petulant child that he is, that you almost you hate him for that.
Yeah. You ready to go to grades?
Yeah, I'm ready to go for grades. I give this movie an A-. I really enjoyed it. I really highly recommend watching it. I think one of the things some people, if you are concerned about seeing John Wick 4 without seeing the previous 3, I don't have the clearest memory of all the other movies because it's been a while since I've seen the first 2 in particular. But the great thing about it is that they're, and a little bit of a weakness, is that the storyline isn't really that packed. This is really a movie about the action.
Yeah, and in a sense, it kind of leans into the lore more than it does the story. And the lore is always ever expanding and explained to you, so.
Yeah, so the great thing about that is that you can go into this movie having no recollection of the other movies and have a great time. I mean, a little bit of the downside is that the story might be a little weak here and there, but really, honestly, I did not give a shit. I thought the movie was great regardless of the little hindrance of the story not being that great because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The movie's not about that. It has a little bit of a storyline. It was a little poignant towards the end. It was really sweet, I thought. And the great thing is you didn't need the other movies to understand it. We brought one of our friends, Derek, with us. We went together.
Hi, Derek.
Yeah, who watched it? Hi, Derek. I don't know why I was looking to your camera, but he had such a great time. Like, he was sitting up in the front of his seat, like almost like a giddy school kid, just like watching the marvelousness that was happening on screen. It was so much fun. Also, one thing we didn't talk about was just how funny the movie was.
Yeah, it's very funny.
There's these little comedy bits that are built into the action sequences so well. Like you said, how Keanu just like runs out of bullets and throws his gun. Yeah. There's so many little things like that.
There's a scene that involves a staircase. I won't spoil it, but the scene kind of starts over in a certain way, and the audacity of that scene starting over just made our whole theater laugh, which was so funny. I gave this film an A- as well, and I know people might be saying, well, Geoff, you gave an A- to After Sun, and that movie is high art. This movie is high art of a very different order.
It's like comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah, it takes a dramatic amount of work to pull a film like this off, and to do it as successfully as this film does. So I was really just awestruck with most of it, and honestly, some of the sequences are so joyous and so funny and so audacious, all you can do is just smile and laugh. I had a ball. It was a great film. And that's it for a review of John Wick Chapter 4, which is now in theaters. So go check it out. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we will see you next time.